What we are going to do today, and welcome to our Timeless Homes podcast. Thank you for watching. It's amazing that anyone watches this in the first place, and we are going to discuss some things today. So the last time I talked about Uzbekistan and my trip to Uzbekistan. Today I took a trip to Boston. We're going to talk about that a little bit, because some of the things that we've talked about at the beginning of this whole Timeless Homes thing is how to make it more timeless than less timeless. That's the whole goal. So how to make architecture so it has the proper massing, scale, proportion, hierarchy, order, and all that type of stuff. And some things I want to illustrate today are things related to proportion. I don't think we've covered that yet. And I have some pretty good images from Boston that illustrate this point. So what do we mean by proportionality? It's the relationship of the parts to the whole and the parts to each other, right? So if we were to describe, the easiest way to describe proportion and the correct proportion of things is looking at cartoons, right, versus the real thing, an actual photograph of the real thing. And it's the difference between having character and being a caricature. C-A-R-A-C-I-T-U-R-E, is that how you spell that? And so one of the reasons why contemporary modern architecture, I don't want to call it modern because that's not the appropriate word, but present day architecture that tries to be traditional, one of the greatest regrettable failures of it is the ill-proportioned details. The details are like completely wrong, and so the proportion of the details is out of scale or out of whack, and it would be the equivalent of a cartoon caricature. It's like the guy on the street painting cartoons of people. And how does that type of a person accomplish their task in order to create almost a humorous type of thing? And that really is what it is. It's almost a comical representation of the authentic thing. And even though in architecture, most architects and builders aren't trying to be funny about it, it's just that we don't understand the principles behind the details to get the proportion right, to execute the design properly, to be authentic. And so inevitably, it just turns out to be a caricature. And so the artist on the street, he would like blow up the eyebrows and the eyes, and he would exaggerate certain features, right? And so it's exaggerating certain features of the face, and while still maintaining the overall relationship so that you can still tell who it is or what it is, but the ears are bigger or the eyes are bigger, just something's out of scale, and so it still has the sense of the thing, but it isn't at all authentic to the thing, and so that's what we call a caricature. And the same thing happens in architecture today, and most often that'll happen in cornices and the details. And it's becoming very, very, very apparent to me why. I wish, how do you be nice about this? When you buy architectural parts and pieces, because buildings are made up of architectural parts and pieces, what you have is you have fabricators, fabrication companies. Fabrication companies supply the architectural parts and pieces in which to build your building. And fabrication companies right now, most of them don't have or have on staff or have hired classically trained architects to actually get traditional details right if they're trying to execute traditional details. And if they do custom stuff, they just do it according to what the architect specifies. And most of the time, contractors will just go, hey, well, what do you think, A, B, or C of these type of cornice or crown moldings or something like that? And they'll say, oh, well, let's do this one or let's do this one. And so it becomes problematic when you're not being a craftsman, but just being, assembling a widget. You know what I'm saying? And so rather than craftsmen building buildings, we now have assemblers of buildings rather than craftsmen of buildings. And so we get off the assembly line whatever architectural parts and pieces this particular fabricator can produce, and that's what we get to have. And so who's actually producing these things? It's not that they can't, it's just they don't know how, because who did they hire to they had to hire up some little CAD monkey, right, to just draw it up. And and that guy, whoever did it, all they know how to do really most of the time, and sorry if you're one of these people, but it's probably true, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you probably just know how to use the program, and then you look at some traditional thing and like, oh, it kind of looks like this, and you kind of draw it up the best you can, not actually thinking, oh, you know what, that thing actually relates to part of the entablature that is divided into 3 sections, and the proportion of this is 2 parts relative to this thing, which is probably 4 parts if the whole thing is 12 parts. You know what I'm saying? I'm willing to bet you probably didn't go into that type of level of analysis when trying to compose the profile of what it is that you were trying to do. So that's what I'm talking about. I know it gets a little bit heavy here, but for those of you who know what I'm talking about, it's interesting. And I have to preface all of this with that because we're going to get into now where everything goes wrong. And I want to pull up a couple pictures here of exactly what I'm talking about. Now this, and when I go through these, so this is in Boston, this is my trip to Boston, and this is right next to, this is a new neighborhood that's trying to be traditional, and anyone who tries, give them props, man, because unless you're really well educated, and I'm talking not just the architect, because the architect can specify all sorts of things, and if the builder and not even the builder, but all the subcontractors and everyone don't understand these things, it's just going to end up mostly like every other building. So with this one that we're looking at right now, this is by the USS Constitution. So we have the museum over here. We got the actual USS Constitution over here. It's a cute little neighborhood. It's right down off the hill from Bunker Hill. And I just want to go through some of this really fast with you guys, because this is where it's interesting, and this is where it's really, really important, and where it all gets lost. So we have a base middle crown. So we have this little tripartite division, which is very traditional. However, where things start to go awry is the scale of this pediment, right? So that gable end is what we call a pediment. And what they really tried to do, and try to do a decent job, is on a pediment you have something called this raking cyma or raking fillet. But the scale of this window as it relates to the actual pediment is enormous. It's just absolutely enormous. And so from the inside it looks really, really nice because you have lots of light coming through. From the outside it just looks completely out of scale and out of proportion. And also the angle of the pitch of that roof right there is not an accurate pediment. What would be better, if for authenticity and timelessness, if that's what you were shooting for, rather than function or practicality, which is what this is, which is fine, the pediment would more likely be that shape. And so this piece right here, which would be called the corona, is a little overscaled. This piece right here underneath this bed mold, a little overscaled. And how far this projects past this surface is way overscaled. And so you have these projections. So what we did is we took all of the accurate elements of the thing and we exaggerated them and pushed them out further than they should be. We enlarged them to a scale outside of the accurate proportion. So what we did was we just effectively took the ears of the person and went whoop, which made a caricature of the real thing. And that's why it can't maintain some sort of timeless feel. And that's why it won't age well over time, and it'll look sort of dated. And that's why right from the get-go it looks just a little bit off, but we don't exactly know what's off. We know it's like, that's a good attempt. It's really attempting to be beautiful, but something's just quite not right. And those are some of the things that are just quite not right. And what's interesting is that happens on virtually every commercial building, no matter where you are, even in Boston. Without some really specific management and careful attention to the details by both the architect and the builder during the construction process, so that things are fabricated right. But budget constraints are a big issue. There's all sorts of issues. And so one of the issues with stucco and these panel types of systems is these giant lines. It's like jeepers. We don't have those in traditional stuff, rarely ever. And these giant bands going around. I mean, really, it probably should have been one band that may have been doubled up there, but to have two identical things repeating just those two things is just really odd. This really ought to be a header rather than not a header. And then as these come down, these lines, why didn't the line, because of the way it was fabricated and constructed, the line should be here, 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 and here. So that way this thing appears like a lintel above that. And because it's not, it's just one more level of, just one more small little detail, but it's an important detail that isn't done accurately, and so you don't get the real thing. And so there's all these tiny little things that keep removing it from the authentic. And this down here is actually pretty good. I honestly don't have any complaints about that. You got these lintels going on, appropriately scaled, appropriately sized with this base, which is nice. And so the base, very good. But here's the interesting things. Once you get into stucco, you're just buying stuff off, foam stuff that these guys sell, and it comes in these sheets, and that's where things really go awry. I've seen over and over and over and over again. And it could be great, honestly. It could be fabulous. It doesn't have to be bad. It just takes a little bit of attention on where the lines go. Because anytime you have a coursing line, anytime you have a division, anytime you have abutting two different pieces of stuff, that is part of the design. And it's not just a quick, easy assembly thing. It's part of the design, and that needs to be considered. And in this building, it wasn't, regrettably. It could have been awesome, and now it's just kind of average. But good job to the people who tried to do it, because they really did try to do a good job, and I'm not going to fault them for failures of artisans and craftsmen who are who don't know any better because they haven't been educated. And we can't get mad at people who don't know what they don't know for reasons they don't know. So if we were to go look at some actual lintels, historic lintels, these are all some modern examples. Here is, I believe, some of these are old and historic. This is the other side of that building. Let's look at it really quick. It's the same building that we were just looking at, the other side. No, is it? I can't remember. Let's go through some things that, once again, trying to be traditional, but it's a caricature, doesn't have character. Why? Right here, this ginormous bed mold. It's completely out of scale. If you look at traditional stuff, these things are divided up into, fractionally smaller pieces than this. This is just way overscaled. That's all I can say. Way overscaled. This thing, it's the same scale as this thing. Way overscaled. It's a cartoon and not authentic. And these are the things, if you're an architect who's trying to learn traditional architecture, these are the things to pay attention to. It's the details. The details are what make the authentic come to life and have character and truly be beautiful and stay beautiful over time. Here's one other thing which is absolutely fascinating. In all of these square windows, they decided not to put any lintels, which is fine. But they also didn't modify the course. I would think there should have been like a soldier course above it, or a jack arch above it, or a lintel, but they put none of it. But then look what they did with the lintel here. What do you notice? If you're watching, sorry if you're not on your YouTube, watching this on YouTube. If you aren't, go back to it and watch it on YouTube. Look how huge those are. Huge. And so one of the issues that we have here is we have these lintels over openings. And in traditional architecture, often what'll happen is you'll have a lintel that's like, the depth of it will be like 1/5 or 1/6 the breadth in terms of its proportion. And that's just a kind of a general rule of thumb, not specific, but a general rule of thumb on how to make it look right and why it would look right. I hope I said that right. I may be thinking of actual trim rather than a lintel. Lintel might be 1/3. I should have done my homework. Should have prepped for this a little bit better, sorry. but regardless, yeah, this one looks like they were trying to keep with the one, if it's a third, the 1/3 principle, and then put that up there, and it just is way too big. It's way too big. And so what does this mean? When you have, in traditional masonry architecture, wide openings are arched. They're always arched, because an arch is how you begin to have wider and wider and wider openings. Or you have some big old wood lintel, right, that will go all the way across. And we've seen that in England as we've looked at some pictures from the Cotswolds and stuff. But these, man, that is just out of scale and out of proportion. Out of scale, out of scale, out of proportion, out of scale, out of proportion. And not only out of scale, out of proportion, let's look at this one up here one last time. No, that is embedded. No, there's a thing right here I want to take a look at. Look at where this line is right here. It lands directly on top of the opening, the joint, whereas this one lands right in the middle of the two, correct? This one should land right there, and this one should land right here, not right on the joint opening. Because visually speaking, how on earth is this lintel supposed to stay up if that joint is right on nothing? It can't. It's a physical impossibility if that were actually load-bearing. But because it's not load-bearing, it doesn't have to, and we don't act like it is. But to me, if architecture is just a stage set for the public life to happen, you and I to engage our lives, then heck, make it a stage set. Who cares about, whether or not it's actually masonry building? I don't buy that argument. Make it look like it is, because and really all we're trying to do is create something beautiful, and that would make it more beautiful. All right, so let's look at a couple other things. Dormers. One of the big issues that we have in today's architecture, primarily residential stuff and multifamily housing, is egress requirements out of windows in dormer spaces. Egress, what does egress mean? It means getting out of this space to that space. And so it's the movement from here to there outside of through an opening. And so when we're trying to get out, in the U.S. anyway, at least, I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but in the U.S., they've made certain space requirements and opening requirements in order to be able to get out, which does something really, really interesting in dormers. Besides, we have insulation requirements, depending on where you are in the U.S., which would turn a wall from a 3-inch wall or 4-inch wall into a 6-inch wall. And so all of a sudden we just increased our insulation, which for energy efficiency is good, but for proportions on the outside starts looking a little bit weird. And then egress makes it even wider, which makes it look even more weird. So look at the dormer here on this building. This is the old, oh man, now I can't even remember. It's an old historic building. I believe it's where the press was. There was some press in this building. Someone's going to look at this and be like, you idiot, it's this. And it's like, yeah, I know. It's some awesome historic building that I should know. Oh, and by the way, look at this. Look at the eaves on this sucker relative to the other one we were just looking at. Look how small this is. Look how small and delicate that is. And then this tiny little molding here. That is proper. That is traditional. That is classical. That is timeless, and that will wear well. But let's look at these dormers. Look how small and petite these things are. Just small and petite, small and petite. Now let's look at a dormer of something a little more today. There's a properly sized egress window that gets lots of light into this dormer space. Now, if we're doing a little critique of this building, I'm totally fine with a lintel that size being above that door. So they didn't overscale their lintel, even though it feels underscaled. Honestly, probably better to be underscaled than overscaled. This one appropriately sized for all of these windows, appropriately sized, a sill appropriately sized. So generally speaking, it looks really nice. Some of the things that don't lead to authenticity, but are just kind of a requirement based on budget and practicality and where you live, is because of the construction methods of this particular building, you don't have any header courses every 6 course, right? And that's in true full masonry buildings, but because this is a veneer masonry, it's just a common bond going across, and it gets kind of monotonous. And so the more we've talked about materials, right? And so the more engineered a material is, the less it looks better over time, and the less texture it has, and the further away from nature it is, and the further away it is from us, And that's why this facade out of brick, even though it is brick and it looks really nice out of brick, it feels a little less approachable. It's because it's so static in its color and texture. But look at the dormers; they're just huge with no eaves. Even though the rake on the gable might be the same proportion, or not the same proportion, but the same pitch. Everything widens out. That widened out, then the whole thing widened out, and that is one of the things just leads to problems and issues when we're looking at and dealing with modern construction requirements methods. So it's just something to be aware of. I still have yet it is so frustrating. I still have yet to be able to convince a builder to do a dormer actually accurate and actually really, really nice. And when I mean accurate and really, really nice, I'm talking about that. That's what I'm talking about. One of those. That's accurate, that's nice. That's timeless. Look at this building. No one can tell me, oh, that looks stupid. No, it doesn't. It's just beautiful. However, that building, the dormers are like, what just happened there? They're a little top heavy, and they're out of scale and out of proportion. Like 2 giant frog eyes up there. So, if you design this building, I'm sorry, but that's okay. You'll get it right next time. Or you'll still get it wrong and just spite me, which is also totally fine. So this trip I went on to Boston was with my brother, who's a developer up in the Portland area. And it was a fascinating conversation, because anytime you get a developer together with an architect, boy, we start talking about everything and looking at all of the different issues. Because my brother, he tries to do pretty traditional stuff, and he showed me one of his projects, and man, it's actually really good. And my big question to him, because he does a lot of multifamily housing, was why can't we do this today? Why is this like almost a virtual impossibility to even do? And one of the issues was scale, and there's a lot of issues that we can't get into today. But what I was telling him about, one of my concerns that I see over and over again, is with large scale developments, large ones. What you have is this static repetition that just leads to this emptiness of character, as it were. And the reason it affects me, I've always just tried to figure this out, because like for instance, go take a look at Jackson Square in New Orleans. Jackson Square in New Orleans, or there's a plaza in Turin, Italy also. I can't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. But you have identical facades, or even the Campidoglio in Rome, have identical facades that mirror each other. And the same thing goes for this place in Jackson. And they're huge buildings, and they're just perfectly repetitive buildings. It's the same window, the same everything that just goes down the whole row. Yet, in one case, the historic traditional case, you don't get tired of it. It's absolutely beautiful. In the more modern cases, that static repetition is just kind of like, whoa, it's just kind of boring and feels very, very just dumbed down. To me, one of the reason why the traditional stuff works is the proper proportion of and the scale of the details. If you're going to do these massive blocks and massive buildings, you have to do details. You can't get away from not doing details. What most often happens from design guidelines, from cities, from architectural review committees, from just your layperson, and if you're a layperson, here's something to really pay attention to because you can take it back and understand something really, really important, is that you can do large scale apartment blocks, but you have to require a sufficient amount of architectural detail in it so that the thing may be repetitive, but it's beautifully repetitive. Whereas what will often happen is you'll try to break up the massing. And so you can't have more than 4 bays or 20 feet without a break in plane or a break in material or something like that. And it's enormously problematic because what you have is you have a static line of your floor heights and your windowsill heights. And so you have windows at this high the whole way, yet you've broken up the facade. You might break up the eave, you might break up the base, you might do something with all of these things if you have a whole apartment block or whatever that you're doing, and you break these things up, yet the middle are exactly the same all the way across. And so what you try to do was break down the scale so it feels like it's at a different scale, but it doesn't feel like it's at a different scale because we missed one really, really, really important thing, and that's the sill height of the windows and the sizes of the windows. And if we look at this picture that I have up right now, it helps illustrate this point. This is a historical street, just right around the corner from where I was staying. And we got out of breakfast out of this place and had a delicious breakfast. I can't even remember the name of it either, but it was fun. And we decided to walk down this street and illustrate, some points. So we have two buildings right here that all have the same height. There's a building adjacent to it. Look at the height of that window relative to the height of the other ones. Obviously, the floor height on here is higher. So this one's just scaled up. The floor is probably right there. And so that's probably, we can count the bricks and figure out what it is. Same here. So these windows are pretty close to the ceiling and not very far off that, off the floor. And so if we put the floor probably right there, we know that this floor is right there. And then what about this building next to it? This is a flat street here too. Look at the window heights here. That is what I'm talking about. And so you still have two together, and so these are the same and these are the same, but they break up the sill heights of the windows, and the floor heights are different. And that is a problem with developers because it doesn't make any economic sense. You can't do it. If you buy an entire block and you're going to put 100 units in this block to do a mixed-use multifamily housing and commercial thing, you want to keep your floor plate the same height because it's not economical to do this to your floor height. And so there's an issue in our economy that we have today. The issue is a matter of scale and giant apartment blocks and how best to approach doing apartment blocks versus breaking it all up and doing individual buildings. You lose economies of scale when you do these individual buildings. They turn out to be more expensive, and if you're trying to provide people affordable housing, what's the balance here? It is quite a dilemma. All I'm doing is trying to illustrate the point as to why we're not getting the results that we want. And Boston had so many examples of great and not so great things going on. And if you want to know the most, there's two super not great things going on. I didn't pull these pictures up there, but that stinking Frank Gehry building at MIT, look at it. I took some pictures. Oh my gosh, it's wearing so bad. It looks terrible. It's all this stainless steel, and it's exactly the point of what I'm talking about. Like the material perfection of modern architecture If it doesn't stay perfect, if the material doesn't stay perfect, it looks terrible, just dirty and filthy. And that's exactly how that Frank Gehry building is wearing. All the watermarks down the steel, it just looks stupid. Looks like someone didn't keep it up. And that's the issue. And that's why these organic, natural material things look way better over time. They can age. My guy's telling me that keeps looking at his clock saying I've talked too long. So we might be wrapping this up pretty soon. But this is a huge, huge issue when looking at multifamily housing and trying to make it not look like giant communist blocks. Because the weird thing is, these giant multifamily housing things that we do, even though we break up the facade every X amount of feet, which is not the right thing to do, it's a matter of scaling things down. And I don't know how we do that. I would love to have a conversation with someone on how we can do that. But we've got to scale it down, mix up floor heights, which will then mix up window heights, which that is the appropriate way to bring the scale down so it fits. And you can see here on this street that we're looking at, there's no break in plane. There's no break in plane in terms of the facade. And there's hardly a break in the height of these things. What it is that small, minor little shift in that window height. That small shift in the window height. That's a 2 foot shift, and that makes a world of difference from the street view. Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about right now. Maybe. Here's one of the things I'm talking about. Here's a dormer trying to be the right size in modern construction, and I just want to give these guys props for really trying. These lintels are great. Another thing is, don't have the same window on the bottom and the top. This one is, I think, probably 4 inches taller than that one. I'd have to count bricks to actually see. But look at this. You got the same sill as the lintel. It's like too static, even though it was more cost effective and it was a lot cheaper to just do the exact same thing here and here. It just doesn't add to the character. And so you should have had a sill rather than a lintel for the sill. This, well proportioned, you got a gutter, you got this and this, well proportioned. That's nice. This is like a 45-degree angle, pretty well proportioned, but probably should have done a 10-12 rather than a 12-12 on that, and added just a slight bit more detail up there. But honestly, pretty well scaled dormers, well scaled, and trying to do good. So could it be way better? Yeah. Would it cost a whole lot more to be way better? Yeah. And so I don't fault them at all. Can't blame them to be able to produce 80% there at a reasonable price. And honestly, trying to do a water table with that lug right there, it would have been nice if you just break that brick out a little bit further so it actually stepped up and in. And the regrettable siding on the side. I get it, cost, I get it, but man, that sucks. So anyway, but you just look at that static thing going down. What would have helped? Pilasters, some sort of break in, where the gutters are coming down, maybe just that type of break in plane with a pilaster. You come out, go back in. That's all you need, and that one thing would help. Any sort of brick arch with a recess would help. Brick arch with a recess, and then that would, every single layer of appropriate detail you do just adds that much more character to something so monotonous in terms of its overall rhythm. And so what did we learn today? What did we talk about? We talked about proportionality of the parts and pieces. And these are some of the most common things that go awry when in the stuff that I deal with on a daily basis when I go to a job site and I'm like, oh crap, why didn't anyone call me? Please call me. And let's talk about these things before we do it so not quite right. And so everyone out there, if you're a craftsman, let's improve, man. Let's get better. Because the architectural heritage all of our ancestors left us is amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and we are not living up to our potential. So let's all just kind of improve together and look at these things and pay attention. And just get better at what we do. So this is Clayton Vance signing off for this little podcast from Timeless Homes. looking at proportionality, or just proportion generally with details. And I'm taking a trip to San Diego next month, and so we'll look at some things from San Diego. Until then, we'll see what I can come up with during this holiday Christmas season. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. I'm a Christmas guy myself. And we'll be in touch. So keep watching, and I hope these are good. If you have any comments, would like to see something, let me know. See you later.